The Therix colony had never been designed to withstand a full-scale invasion. Its architects had built it as a peaceful junction world, a quiet trade nexus surrounded by shimmering nebulae, its skies streaked with migrating crystal birds whose wings reflected the faint purple glow of the system's dwarf star. For generations, the colony enjoyed a reputation of tranquility. Its streets were woven with floating walkways that connected towering crystalline structures, its oceans were cultivated for rare mineral plankton, and its defense grid was more ceremonial than functional. The Therix were not warriors by nature. They were builders, artists, mathematicians, and historians who believed that culture mattered more than conflict. They took pride in the fact that no invader had ever bothered to strike them. But that illusion shattered the moment the Vrask arrived. Not in a diplomatic envoy. Not in a trade convoy. But as a tidal wave of warships ripping through slip-space ruptures that tore the sky wide open. The first bombardment hit before the Colony Council even understood what was happening, collapsing 3 districts into burning ruins and sending shockwaves that cracked the great Citadel dome, once thought indestructible. Sirens wailed across the city while thousands of civilians fled through the defense corridors, their movements frantic and disorganized, because no one had ever trained them to respond to war. The Vrask did not announce their intentions. They simply struck with the ruthless precision of a species that saw weakness as an invitation. They descended with raider battalions, tearing through the outer districts, looting research facilities, and rounding up prisoners to be sold into slavery in distant systems. For 3 days the sky glowed red and purple from continuous shelling. Hospitals overflowed. Water systems failed. Supply drones were blasted from the air. The Therix Defense Forces, a tiny security detachment meant only for crowd control, were wiped out in the first 20 hours. On the morning of the 4th day, Commander Rillan stood before the cracked observation window of the central control tower, staring at a city that looked like it was dissolving. Plumes of smoke choked the horizon, entire districts had turned into black scars, and the dome shielding the last group of survivors flickered weakly, its power grid draining rapidly. He tried to ignore the frightened tremor in his own hands as he rested them on the railing. He had already sent the distress signal to every known ally. Simple message, simple plea, urgent reinforcements required. Enemy forces overwhelming. Therix falling. But the galaxy had answered with silence. Neighboring species were too far, too busy, or too afraid to intervene. Some simply ignored the call. Others responded with apologies. Some channels never opened at all. The commander stood there, exhausted, defeated, and muttered the words he had been avoiding for hours. "No one is coming." Even the officers around him felt the same truth settling into their bones. The colony was doomed. Their people would fall, their culture would be erased, and in a few decades, no one would even remember that this peaceful world had once existed. But just as despair began to calcify into acceptance, the alarm system let out a deep, resonant tone. Not the sharp chime indicating enemy bombardment. Not the falling whistle sound signaling shield failure. This alarm was something none of them had heard before, a long, thunderous tone that vibrated through the walls, warping the air with its intensity. Rillan frowned. "What is that?" he demanded. "Unknown alert signature," yelled the sensor officer. We've never received this before." Before anyone could respond, the sky above the city began to fracture. At first, it looked like lightning, thin cracks of blinding white carving across the clouds. Then the cracks widened, deepened, and expanded into colossal slip-space fissures that swallowed the horizon. The control tower lights flickered. Air pressure shifted. The ground trembled as the fissures widened into gateways large enough to swallow mountains. And then, ships emerged. Not one. Not two. But dozens. Hundreds. A formation so impossibly vast that the scanners froze mid-calculation, overwhelmed. The system struggled for several seconds before finally printing a single word in massive red glyphs across every monitor in the tower: Armada. Gasps filled the room. Officers rose from their stations. Civilians inside the dome pressed their hands to the glass, staring upward in disbelief. Commander Rillan felt his knees weaken as the silhouettes became clearer: sharpened hulls, angular plating, the unmistakable architecture of a species known for one thing above all: total commitment when answering a call for help. And when one of the sensor officers whispered the species' name, her voice cracked with emotion, her entire body trembling with disbelief. Humans! It's the humans! They came! They had asked the galaxy for reinforcements. Humanity answered with a war fleet that blocked out the stars. The Vrask noticed the incoming human war fleet even before the Therics fully understood what they were looking at. Hidden among the clouds, a Vrask strike cruiser monitored the slip space activity, and when it registered the sheer magnitude of the arriving force, its crew reacted with the first emotion their species had felt in generations: fear. Vrask were apex predators, genetically engineered conquerors who fed on fear and thrived on chaos. They built their empire through intimidation and ruthlessness, attacking weak worlds and crushing them with overwhelming brutality. The Therics were the perfect victims. But humans? Humans were not prey, they were the nightmare whispered in war stories. When the first human dreadnought emerged from the slip space rupture, the Vrask fleet immediately broke formation. It wasn't a tactical retreat, it was panic. Their ships turned sharply, thrusters firing at full burn as they scattered across the sky like insects fleeing fire. The human dreadnought dwarfed everything, an ancient steel colossus, its hull covered in battle scars, every plate marked with the history of wars the Vrask had only heard about. The ship's thrusters glowed like molten suns as it descended, atmospheric friction igniting its armor in a blazing halo. The dreadnought didn't broadcast warnings or diplomatic messages. Humans rarely did. When they arrived to a battlefield, they spoke through action, not speeches. As the ship completed its descent, its weapons rotated into place, massive spinal cannons aligning like the jaws of a leviathan. The Vrask opened fire first, their energy bolts streaking across the clouds in chaotic lines. Not a single shot hit. Human point defense systems shredded the incoming blasts with machine precision, intercepting hundreds of projectiles in seconds. And then humanity responded. The dreadnought's primary cannon unleashed a beam so bright it turned the sky into pure daylight. The beam cut through a Vrask cruiser like a hot blade through fragile glass, slicing it cleanly in half before the ship even registered critical failure. Both have spiraled downward, crashing into the ocean in plumes of steam. Panic erupted across the Vrask calm channels. Human battleships poured through the slip space fissure one after another, forming massive phalanxes that locked into coordinated assault grids with the discipline of a species that had built its military doctrine on centuries of surviving near-extinction events. Frigates zipped around the larger vessels, intercepting escape attempts. Carriers deployed drone wings that blanketed the sky in layered formations. And behind them all loomed the flagship, a titan of reinforced alloy, radiating enough energy to disrupt local weather patterns. The Therics watched all of this with stunned awe. For them, this wasn't just military aid, it was witnessing a myth come alive. Their legends spoke of humans who fought entire wars with outnumbered forces and still prevailed. Of humans who responded to distress signals with overwhelming force because they refused to gamble with innocent lives. But no legend prepared them for this sight. Humanity didn't come to support the Therics' defense. Humanity came to obliterate the threat. The Vrask attempted to regroup, peeling back toward the edge of the atmosphere, but human interceptors streaked through the sky like vengeful comets. Their engines left trails of white-hot plasma as they weaved through enemy fire and dismantled the Vrask formation one ship at a time. The interceptors didn't waste shots. They struck weak points with lethal accuracy, each kill swift and final. The commander of the Vrask flagship ordered a full retreat, but by then it was too late. Human destroyers flanked the vessel, locking on with gravitic tethers that tore through its shields like paper. The flagship's hull cracked under the stress, splitting apart before its reactors could be stabilized. When it exploded, the blast lit the sky with a violet shockwave that rippled through clouds and shattered windows across the colony. The surviving Vrask ships scrambled in desperation, abandoning their positions, abandoning their wounded, abandoning any semblance of pride. But humans pursued. Not aggressively. Not with cruelty. But with the cold, focused precision of soldiers who had accepted a responsibility, no Vrask vessel would be allowed to regroup and return stronger. Within minutes, more than 80% of the Vrask fleet was burning debris. The remaining vessels attempted to flee into orbit, but human heavy cruisers emerged above the atmosphere like executioners. Their rail cannons fired in synchronized volleys, each shot like a thunderclap that shattered another fleeing raider into fragments. The last Vrask transmission recorded before their network collapsed was a single terrified phrase. "Humans have arrived, we cannot win." And they were right. When the sky finally cleared of enemy ships, the Therics expected the human fleet to hold position and observe. Instead, the next phase began instantly. Human carriers opened their bay doors, releasing hundreds of drop pods that streaked through the atmosphere like falling stars. Each pod was an armored spear designed to pierce through enemy defenses and deploy elite infantry within seconds. The launch sequence shook the entire colony, rattling windows and sending tremors through the ground as the pods ripped through cloud layers in synchronized patterns. Civilians, still cowering inside the dome, watched in stunned silence as the pods descended with terrifying beauty, glowing trails illuminating the smoke-filled sky, each one a promise of salvation delivered with military precision. When the first pod slammed into the ground, the shockwaves rippled outward, cracking pavement and scattering rubble. The pod doors blew open with hydraulic bursts, revealing human marines in full exoskeleton armor. Their armor was not sleek or ornamental, it was thick, reinforced, built to withstand artillery and atmospheric re-entry. Their visors glowed with tactical overlays that mapped every threat within kilometers. Their rifles hummed with charged energy. And they moved with the smooth, confident steps of soldiers who had survived so many battles that fear was simply another piece of equipment to manage. The Therics had always seen humans as strange, small, fleshy beings lacking natural weapons or armor. But seeing them like this, in their war form, changed everything. These were not fragile primates. These were champions forged by suffering, honed by necessity, and unleashed with purpose. The Marines immediately split into coordinated teams. Some stormed the abandoned districts, purging the last pockets of Vrask ground troops with brutal efficiency. Others secured safe corridors, marking paths for evacuating civilians. Combat engineers deployed automated shield barriers that popped into existence like shimmering walls of light. Medics rushed into debris-filled streets, scanning wounded Therics with portable nanite injectors that stabilized vitals in seconds. Specialized units swept through underground tunnels, detecting life signs and rescuing trapped survivors buried beneath collapsed structures. Every squad moved as if following an invisible rhythm, each Marine aware of the others, every action precise, every decision instant. Within 30 minutes, the city zones marked as irretrievably lost on Therics tactical maps were fully reclaimed and secured by human forces. The Vrask ground troops, who had tormented the colony with impunity for days, were now hunted instead of hunters. Human Marines engaged them with swift brutality, neutralizing them in minutes. The Vrask fought back. They were vicious, towering beasts with natural armor and bone blades. But against humans in full combat gear, they were outmatched. A Vrask warrior swung its serrated arm blade at a human Marine. The blade shattered on impact against reinforced armor. The Marine responded with a single controlled burst that dropped the creature instantly. The Theric civilians watched from behind damaged barriers, their wide luminous eyes filled with a mix of fear and awe. They had always been told humans were unpredictable, chaotic, too emotional, too reckless. But what they saw now was something entirely different. Discipline incarnate. Humanity's reputation for brutality masked something deeper, an unwavering commitment to protect. When humans fought, they didn't simply aim to win. They aimed to ensure no innocent under their watch would be harmed again. More pods fell. More Marines deployed. More zones were reclaimed. The Therics leadership slowly emerged from the dome, escorted by human soldiers who towered over them not in size, but in presence. Commander Rillan found himself walking through streets he once believed would become his people's graves. Instead, they were now filled with human armored personnel carriers rolling through with quiet engines, drone repair units sealing broken structures, and holographic triage tents humming with medical efficiency. Rillen felt his throat tighten as he passed a group of human soldiers guiding a small cluster of Therix children away from a collapsed school. The soldiers spoke softly, projecting warmth despite their terrifying armor. One child reached out to touch a Marine's gauntlet, and the giant soldier knelt to their level, offering a reassuring nod. In that moment, something shifted in Rillen's understanding of humans. They were not warriors because they loved war. They were warriors because someone had to be, and humans refused to let that burden fall on those who couldn't carry it. By the end of the first hour, the Therix colony wasn't merely defended. It was liberated. And every surviving Vrask soldier who tried to escape was met with the same cold truth: humanity had arrived, and they were not leaving any evil standing. Silence slowly settled over the ruined colony, not the silence of death, but the silence that follows the end of terror. Smoke drifted through the broken skyline, glowing orange in the light of distant fires still being extinguished. Human capital ships hovered in the sky like mountain-sized guardians, their hull lights blinking in steady, reassuring rhythms. Beneath those titanic shadows, the Therix finally dared to breathe again. Medical transports descended from the fleet, deploying ambulatory drones and emergency crews who moved through the ruins with practiced calm. Within minutes, they established sprawling triage zones wrapped in shimmering barrier fields. Human medics, trained to handle emergencies on dozens of different species, worked tirelessly to stabilize the injured. They used tools the Therix had never seen: portable bioreactors, organ stabilizer clamps, accelerated clotting nanogel, and they worked with a gentle, confident urgency that radiated hope. Human engineers began sealing ruptured buildings, deploying drones that unfolded into temporary support beams. Larger mechs cleared debris, lifting entire collapsed structures with hydraulic arms strong enough to bend starship hull plating. Communication teams set up relay towers, restoring colony-wide channels in mere minutes. Relief drops from orbit showered the streets with crates of food, clean water, power cells, and medical supplies. Everywhere the Therix looked, humans were rebuilding what the Vrask had destroyed, with a speed and determination that made it seem like they were trying to erase every trace of suffering. Humans didn't simply fight battles. They healed the aftermath. Commander Rillen stood on what remained of the central plaza, watching the transformation unfold when a group of human officers approached. Leading them was a woman in matte black armor, her helmet tucked under one arm. She stood tall, not physically, but in posture, carrying herself with the unshakable confidence of someone who had faced worse and survived. Her hair was streaked with gray, her eyes sharp and calm. She surveyed the ruined plaza, the damaged buildings, the collapsed monuments, and then met Rillen's gaze with a steady nod. "Commander," she said, her voice calm but filled with purpose. "I'm Admiral Mara Holt, United Earth Fleet." Rillen bowed his head in deep gratitude, struggling to form words. Holt studied him for a moment before continuing. "Your distress call described the situation as urgent reinforcements required." She gestured to the sky, toward the endless human warships covering nearly half the visible horizon. "So we brought reinforcements." Rillen's voice cracked. "Admiral, you brought an entire armada." The corner of Holt's lips lifted slightly, not quite a smile, but a brief softening. "We've learned something from history," she said. "If you send a small force, the enemy comes back stronger. If you send overwhelming force—" She looked toward the scattered remains of the Vrask ships burning in the distance. "The enemy doesn't come back at all." Rillen exhaled shakily. We thought no one would answer our call." Holt paused. Her expression shifted to something more serious, almost personal. "Commander," she said quietly, "humans don't ignore distress calls. Not after what our ancestors went through." She tapped her wrist pad, projecting a small hologram showing hundreds of signals, some recent, some decades old, recorded from across the galaxy. "We have a rule in our fleet: if someone begs for help, we go. Even if it's far. Even if it's dangerous. Even if we don't know them. Because once, long ago, humanity sent calls that no one answered." Rillen felt his breath catch. Humans fought with ferocity because they remembered abandonment. They saved others because they remembered being unsaved. Admiral Holt turned her gaze toward the sky as more human ships descended. Our humanitarian teams will remain until your infrastructure is restored. We'll help rebuild your power grid, purify your water systems, and reinforce your defense networks so this never happens again. Rillin could barely speak. He bowed his head deeply, overcome. Admiral, we owe you our lives. Holt shook her head. You don't owe us anything, she said. Just rebuild. Live. That's repayment enough. As she walked away to coordinate the next phase, Rillin felt an overwhelming realization settle into his heart. The humans hadn't come as saviors expecting gratitude. They had come as warriors who refused to let another world suffer the same way theirs once had. And for the first time in days, hope began to bloom among the ruins. In the weeks that followed, the Therix colony transformed from a smoldering ruin into a thriving reconstruction site powered by human technology and determination. Human engineers worked side by side with Therix artisans, blending human alloy frameworks with crystalline Therix architecture to rebuild structures stronger than ever before. Human medics trained Therix healers in advanced trauma techniques while continuing to treat survivors with unwavering compassion. Food distribution centers operated day and night. Power grids were restored. Schools reopened. The colony lived again, not in fear, but in gratitude. Stories of the battle spread like wildfire across Therix space. They spoke of the day the sky split open and humans emerged like titans. They spoke of dreadnoughts descending with the wrath of ancient gods. They spoke of marines who fought like legends and medics who healed like miracles. And they spoke of the moment the Vrask learned what countless species before them had learned the hard way: never harm those humans call friends. New lessons filled Therix academies. Their younglings studied the battles not with fear, but with admiration. They memorized the names of human ships, the formations used by the war fleet, and the strange but powerful human belief that every life deserved saving. They debated how a species so physically small could wield such vast strength. They marveled at how humanity balanced ferocity and compassion as if they were two halves of the same soul. And slowly, a new saying emerged, first whispered in classrooms, then spoken in council chambers, and finally etched into a plaque in the rebuilt Central Plaza. If you need allies, call the stars. If you need hope, call your friends. But if you need a miracle, call the humans. By the time the Armada prepared to depart, thousands of Therix gathered along the cliffs overlooking the ocean, watching the human fleet ascend. The sky shimmered with engine light as the ships formed massive geometric patterns, each one a symbol of unity and strength. Commander Rillin stood beside Admiral Holt, both silent as they watched the breathtaking sight. Holt broke the silence first. Your world will recover, she said. Your people are resilient. And we couldn't have done it alone, Rillin replied softly. He turned to the Admiral, voice steady. Humanity saved us. We will never forget that. Holt clasped her hands behind her back. One day, another world will send out a call, she said. When that day comes, I hope the Therix will be among the first to answer. Rillin nodded. We will. That is a promise. The Admiral smiled, an actual smile this time, before giving a final salute. Moments later, the human fleet began their slip-space jump. Rifts opened across the sky, light bending and warping in magnificent arcs. The ships accelerated, vanishing into the shimmering tunnels of space until only silence remained. But the Therix knew the truth. Humanity had not merely rescued them. Humanity had adopted them. Generations later, Therix children would ask their elders what it felt like when the humans arrived. And the elders would always say the same thing. It felt like the universe remembered us. And now I ask you, if a full human war armada appeared in the sky to protect your world, what would you do? Tell me in the comments.